I'm John Duval. Welcome to the Scriptural Way Bible Study. The Scriptural Way Bible Study is brought to you by the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, I would like to thank you for your interest in spiritual matters. Now, let's take our Bibles and seek the Scriptural Way. Greetings, I'm John Duvall.
And I'm Dale Decker.
I'm John Hall.
And this is the Scriptural Way broadcast. Gentlemen, how are y'all doing this evening?
I'm doing fantastic. We've got snow today. We got rain. They got 6 inches of snow in western Oklahoma today.
Did they really?
They did.
That's a good bit of snow, isn't it?
For western Oklahoma, that's a lot of snow.
John, how you getting along today?
I'm doing good.
Good. Well, we hope that everything for you is going well this evening. We did get some snow in our neck of the woods today, and it will probably be gone sometime tomorrow.
Yeah, there wasn't enough to make snow ice cream.
Yeah, the kids would be ecstatic if it would get cold enough tonight to freeze the wet roads, and the school system would then have no school tomorrow. They would be happy about that. You know, the drawback to the Edmond public school system district and everything, they when they redid the calendar, tacked on and made allowances for 8 snow days automatically. But here's kind of the kicker with that. If you don't take it, you don't get it at the end of the school year. You know, they don't give you the 8 days off. You have to go the full time. So last year, the kids thought they got cheated when there was no snow days whatsoever, and they still had to go to school the extra days allotted for it.
Even though they failed to recognize that they were 8 days smarter for going to school.
Thanks, Dale. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Hopefully things are going well for you, and you're not sitting next to someone such as I am doing this evening. Although Dale's a good man.
I can move on the other side, and John can sit next to you.
No, you'd still be in the same room, so it won't make much difference. So.
Well,
You guys gonna spend a little time together today, huh?
It's going to be hard today, isn't it?
No. I tell you what, talking about divisions, that's what we're looking at in our study tonight. About 3 weeks ago, we began to look at divisions among churches. And there are a lot of different denominations in the world today, all stemming from various divisions, religious beliefs. One of the largest divisions, I would suggest, are causers of divisions. They're about to lose their universal leader. He's going to step down, and they're going to have to find someone else to take his place.
Yeah, you know, that's the first time that's happened in 700 years.
That's what I've heard, as far as someone actually retiring from that position. Yeah. And it's one religion out of thousands. And the question is why? Why is there so many religions? And last week the last 2 weeks ago, we concluded the first part of the study where we looked at what the Bible teaches, how that there was only one church. Christ built only one church. But tonight's lesson, what we're going to be doing is taking a look, I believe, at 10 different words of warning stated by Christ and the apostles regarding the upcoming apostasy. And well, here's what's interesting about it is they promised apostasy would come. They warned about it. And it's not something that we're still waiting on. It was something that happened before the end of the first century. And our third lesson gets us into that, where we'll actually look at evidences where apostasy was taking place before the end of the first century there. Okay. Let Brian know in the chat room, I just read what he's writing there, that the live broadcast should work in the iPad. It is supposed to be working, so for whatever that's worth. If you don't see the chat room, then don't worry about that. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and begin going back to about AD 51, Dale.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I need to pull the mic up a little
I think so.
Okay, am I a little quiet? Is that better now? Okay. Now, the reason why I say AD 51, this is roughly when this first warning here was written. Typically, we say that the church was established in 33 AD. Now, that's assuming that Jesus was born at 0 AD. And some scholars speculate, based on different evidences, that it was probably more likely about 4 to 6 BC or 6 to 4 BC where Jesus probably was born, which would have the establishment of the church about 28, 29 AD. So but I'm going to round it up to 31 just for the sake of argument. Within 20 years, approximately.
Never heard anybody round up to 31. Have you ever?
Well,
No, never have heard that.
Interesting.
I'm sorry, I wasn't a math major. So let's just say 31 for sake of argument.
Okay.
There. A round number of 20 years. How about that? That's where I was going maybe. 20 years after that, we have the Apostle Paul writing something which already acknowledged the possibility of falling away. And we're going to look at that. This one's from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 1 through 12 actually. So we're going to break this up here. And Dale, if you would, read for us the first 4 verses there.
I'll be glad to.
2
2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. New King James Version says, Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
Okay. Now, this man of sin that the Apostle Paul is referencing, he said that he was going to exalt himself up above others, and individuals would worship him. And then on top of that, you notice there in verses 3 and 4 that he says there that who opposes and exalts himself above all that's called God, that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God. And some scholars suggest, some commentators suggest, that this man of perdition, this man of sin, he is going to originate within the church. It's going to be someone who is a part of the church, or at least appears to be a part of the body of Christ. And when he begins to take this self-exalted leadership role, it will be within a local congregation. At least that's what some commentators kind of suggest.
Well, and when the Apostle Paul was talking to the elders at the church of Ephesus,
That's right.
he warned them that there would be some among you that would cause all this problem.
That's right. Some would rise up from among them teaching perverse things.
That's exactly right.
And I think that's one of the texts we'll be looking at a little bit later.
And we always have issues where there is either the preacher or one of the elders that seems to be always elevated above others. And the reason being is because that individual generally tries to put themselves above others.
That's one of the biggest dangers of preaching.
It is.
It's bad enough if you have someone who is self-elevated, all right. But when you've got members telling you, good job, great sermon, and a lot of praise and everything, it is over the course of time. It is very easy, and I'm going to say especially for a young preacher. I'm not exclusively identifying it with young preachers only. Older preachers obviously are quite subjected to it as well. But it'd be easy for someone to let it go to their head, and become kind of somewhat pompous and arrogant. And if that's the case of Pointe, it's not far from that individual becoming kind of what Paul's talking about.
Basically what it is intellectual pride.
There you go. That's it. Intellectual pride. Now, John, this almost sounds like, and if someone's part of this religion, it's not our attempts to offend, but what religion that developed in the 1st and 2nd century kind of fits this pattern?
Good question. I lost what you were saying as I was thinking about what I wanted to say. So,
I'll give you a hint. Eventually, Pope Boniface identified himself as the first universal pope.
okay. Well, I'll go with the Catholic religion for
yeah.
100.
Catholics for 100?
Now, of course, theirs is not the only religious group that has someone that's self-exalted and so forth.
No, but there's the only, well, I shouldn't say the only religious group, but theirs is one of the major religious groups where just as the Pope here just announced that, what is it, February 28th he's resigning, the last day of the month, of the month. And part of the reason he's doing that is because his predecessor was pretty sick in his last days and was not able to fulfill the responsibilities, and so he doesn't want that to happen with him. So he's made, and his health is starting to fail him now, and so he's made the decision that he's going to step down. So what do? They go out and they interview all the Catholics they can get their hands on to see how they feel about it. And you can see that they worship this man because many of them are literally in tears, and they're confused about what's going to happen in the Catholic Church now that this man has made the decision to suddenly step down. If he died, they would still have all these tears and everything, but it wouldn't be quite as confusing to them.
Some would take issue, obviously, with using the term saying they worship him.
They might, yeah, but that's basically what they do.
And I'm not trying to compare the Pope with the Beatles, but you look at the old reels, old videos of the Beatles performing, and the way people would just fall all over themselves, before them, and there's a sense of a similar reaction. Now, like I said, some commentators look at this and say, "Yep, he is identifying the upcoming of the Pope," and it didn't happen overnight. The position of the pontificate developed over the slow course of time, and we'll talk about some of this next week. But it ultimately ends up with one person sitting on, if you would, the proverbial throne over what they view to be the church. So that's why some identify this. But I don't think it's limited to the Pope. I think he was just saying there's going to be a departure, and there will be those who will rise up to lead people away.
But you see, and your point is well taken here, he's talking to the church of Thessalonica. And he's talking to this group of Christians, and basically he's saying, among this group of Christians, these people are going to fall away.
Okay.
It's not going to be the Pope, it's not going to be the Catholic Church that causes them to fall away. It's going to be their own lack of knowledge and their own desire to want to make some changes.
Right.
And this is exactly what he told the elders at Ephesus.
And it could be that son of perdition is talking about the devil, and it's talking about his influence over those, or those who would follow him from within the church, as in, like you said, Ephesus, from within the local church there. Now, let me say this. We want to hear from you. If you haven't signed in the chat room, please take a moment to do so. We would definitely love to hear what you have to think about this. Are we off the mark? Do you think maybe this is talking about the Catholic Church, or just more of a general warning as we'll develop as we go through this study? John, any thoughts or comments?
Well, I was just noticing as I went through the 10 examples that we're going to go through tonight, it seemed like a number of them at least had a primary method that Satan might be using to pull these various Christians that are being talked to away from actually serving Christ, and pull them into some false doctrine or false teaching. And so I was looking at this one, and at first I thought I had an understanding of it, but now I'm going to want to ask a question. When he says here, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, is he talking about there not to be fearful, or is he talking about confusion?
I think he's talking about confusion.
Okay.
In other words, because notice the way he words it, not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. All right, there would be some taught that there was no resurrection. Others taught the resurrection had already passed. And so he's telling them, you may get letters from people saying this or that. Don't be shaken by that. Okay. Even if they claim to come from us.
Right. So initially I thought this was a tactic of fear, but now it's more a tactic of misrepresentation.
Yeah.
Someone saying, this is truth and it's coming from this body of people who you trust, when truly it's not.
Exactly. That's exactly right. In the chat room, there's a comment. Josh Thornhill kind of agrees, kind of what we were saying there. He says, I think it might be more general, but definitely fits the Catholic Church, And in that, the behavioral pattern fits the identification here. And so, or I should say, they fit the pattern that he warns about here.
I saw one later on that, it's really a very close fit for me anyway when I was reading through it. It was really hitting on those lines, so we'll hit that later. But
most certainly, we'll talk about that here in a minute. But before we continue with this, let's go ahead and take our first break. On the other side of the break, we're going to pick up there with verse 5. And we're going to find here that his appearance, that is the son of perdition, will be hindered for a time. But the foundation for this lawlessness was already being laid during the days of the Apostle Paul. 20 years after the church was established, there was already people trying to pervert the truth of God's word. So we'll look at that more when we come back. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Ron Witt, one of the elders of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, I would like to invite you to be our guest at any of our worship services and Bible classes. The meeting place of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ is located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, zip code 73013. The Seminole Pointe Church of Christ meets Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Bible classes, 10:30 for worship service, and 5 p.m. for our afternoon worship service. We also have Bible classes on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Whether you live in Oklahoma City area or you are traveling through Oklahoma City, we would love to have you come and be our guest. We have Bible classes for all ages. At the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, our focus is to teach only the Word of God. Rest assured that when you visit with us, you will find that we will appeal only to God's precious Word. Now, let us return to our study.
All right, let's go a little farther here in this text, John, and let's read, if you would, verses 5 through 7 of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Okay. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 5. Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? And now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way.
Okay. Now, it's a very interesting passage to kind of look at here, because he says, do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? This tells us that Paul, when he had gone through there, had already warned them. Even Jesus made the point that there would be those who would try to bring in and who would claim to be the Christ, who would claim to be the Messiah. And there were even false messiahs of the day there. And so he says, and now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time. For the mystery of the lawlessness is already at work. This apostasy was already growing. There was already individuals who were jealous of the apostles. I strongly suspect some Jews that were converted missed the glory days when they were in charge and were now trying to take control of this new thing that was going about. We see that in Galatians, that problem definitely with the Judaizing teachers there. But the point is that this departure was already present. Dale, any thoughts?
No, if you go to Matthew 24, verses 4 and 5, Jesus Christ himself said that there would be some that would deceive you. And so Paul's echoing exactly what Jesus said earlier, knowing man's mindset, that there are these individuals who think that they have a better way, that they think they know different than God. And they will always try to do their own thing.
That's true. That's true. John?
Yeah, guest here said, I believe we have so many religions today because so many fell away early on. I agreed as speaking about early Christians, but could certainly apply today, going back to our discussion a little bit ago. It's interesting when you think about that, how much success the apostles and some of their disciples were having spreading the word initially. I think you can kind of see when you think about it logically why it was such an opportunity for others to pervert that teaching.
Yeah.
Because they see this success, and now they see an opportunity to have that same success. If they just take most of what's being taught, maybe tweak it a little bit here or there, modify it some, change it to fit their desires, and then have that same success
Yeah.
draw those same people, either have glory, power, and possibly, as especially in the early days, early 1900s, money, as
Right.
was going through the land here in the United States.
Yeah.
So,
And same thing today.
mhm.
Yeah, I'm not going to say, there may be people who try to start religions for the cause of money, but it definitely becomes a big draw. You know, it keeps them going there. And I agree with what the guest is saying there, that the application of these things, and this is why we cover it, is why religions, why you have a variety of religions cropping up today, even this day and time. Someone doesn't want to follow the pattern of scriptures, or they think, as you said, John, they think they have a better way, and that's a better understanding of the scriptures, and so they want to follow that. Yeah. Okay, Dale, let's look at verse 8 there.
Paul says, then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming.
So this lawlessness is going to continue, but at some point it's going to come to an end, isn't it?
That's very true.
Yeah. And so there will be, you know, kind of like weeds in the flower bed. There will be weeds continuing to crop up, but at some point when the Lord comes again, that will all be dealt with.
You know, and that kind of goes along with the parable of the tares, doesn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. A terrible proverb.
A terrible proverb, that's
Terrible.
true. But,
Terrible parable.
I mean, you could look at that same analogy today. If you've ever walked into a wheat field, you
Yeah.
know that there are weeds in there that mimic or look a lot like the wheat.
That's right.
But those weeds must be destroyed, and the only way you can destroy them is when you harvest the wheat.
That's right. That's exactly right. And Jesus warned about it then, and it continues on today.
Exactly right.
All right, now let's look at verses 9 through 10, John. Let's take this a little bit farther here within the text here.
Okay. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteousness, deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, and that they might be saved.
Okay, oftentimes we quote verses 9 and 10. Well, go ahead and read 11 and 12 too. Let's pull that into it.
And for this reason God will send them strong delusion, that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness.
Okay. He identifies in verse 9 there that the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan. Okay. Now, it's interesting when he says, with all power, signs, and lying wonders. There were people in the first century who performed miracles, and they did it by the power of God. Pardon me. But I strongly believe that there were people back then who claimed to perform miracles, but who did not perform miracles. Think about Simon the sorcerer. Simon the sorcerer used the skills that he had developed to trick people into thinking that he had great powers when he did not. And then when he saw the real thing, he wanted to have the real thing there. And even in today's time, you have individuals who will claim to do miracles. They'll claim to see Mary in toast, you know, and things like that, and call it some sort of wonder sent from God. But in reality, it's not miracles from God. It's lying wonders. It's simply used in the hope to get people to believe and accept what it is that they're teaching.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are just looking for something to believe in. Anything to believe in, really. Not looking for the truth, but they're just looking for anything to believe in.
Exactly. And not trying to make fun of anyone's what they sincerely believe, I guess. But when I was at McDonald's years ago, and I took a picture of this, I had poured my syrup onto the little butter pack and the syrup was hot, and it formed a face, and took a picture of it. And I saw Satan in my butter. Now, you know, if I was not grounded within the truth, as I hope that I am, I might have taken that and just said, look, this is a sign. It means something. And oftentimes they will see something that's not there, and they establish their faith upon something that is not worthy of the establishment of their faith. Mm-hmm. Oh. Dale, any thoughts?
Well, the one thought, you brought up the fact that there are people today who claim they can perform miracles and everything. One of the promises that Jesus made to his apostles was that they would be able to, not only that they would be able to perform miracles, but one of those miracles they would be able to perform would be to bring those who have passed on back to life.
Yeah.
It's interesting that everybody since the church was established that claimed they can perform miracles that was not given that power by God have never claimed that they could bring someone back from the dead.
Say that again.
Those individuals today
Mm-hmm.
who claim they can perform miracles never claim that they can bring someone back from the dead.
Yeah, I've heard people supposedly claim that they saw people being raised from the dead, but very seldom do you hear of a local healing going on where it says bring out your dead, and we'll bring up your dead.
Or no, you have never heard of anybody who has had a relative or a close person pass away that they have called that miracle worker to come and raise
Yeah.
them from the dead.
I've often thought that'd be one of the best ways of convincing people. Go to the local hospital.
Absolutely.
You
If
know,
they
and-
could do it, why wouldn't they?
Yeah, every time someone dies, go and heal that dead individual.
They would have a tremendous following if they were able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. But it all comes down to lying wonders. Think about, Moses did something great when he cast his rod down. But Pharaoh's servants appeared to do something just as great on about 3 or 4 of the occasions. The key is they appeared to, and they were fraudulent. John, any thoughts?
Randall in the chat room quotes 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11, where he says, "When I was a child, I spake as a child, I felt as a child, I thought as a child. Now that I am become a man, I have put away childish things." He says many times people are children in their spiritual thinking. Children are stimulated by vision, adults are stimulated by reason. And he goes on to say the people that are supposedly raised from the dead, as you're talking about, they are always in some part of a third world country somewhere, never in plain sight of the population. You hear these rumors, these stories, and have somehow transferred over
Yeah,
from somewhere.
that's a good point. That's a very good point.
You would think if somebody could perform these miracles, the first thing they would do is they'd get a couple camera television stations, to get their cameras out there, get it all set up, get it ready, get someone that everybody knew was dead for a few days, or something like that, and bring them back, and then they'd have everybody that they wanted following them.
I mean, the apostles effectively sought that same, or solicited the same publicity. Once Jesus began his ministry, when people heard, they flocked around him.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Apostle Paul, if memory serves, on a couple occasions, people, we're all coming around him because of what was being done. Well, would that not be the same thing as bringing in a camera crew? And the whole point is to let more people see, so they might believe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we keep in mind what was the purpose of the signs and the wonders and everything, it should be the same purpose today. And if indeed
Exactly.
these miracle workers want to be able to grow their flock, so to speak, they would certainly want people to know and see these signs and wonders.
And that's right. And here's the thing, when you're sitting there watching on television, and let's say if you're sitting there, and I'm not sure if those who listen to this broadcast and join us for this study would do this, but let's say for the sake of argument, you're sitting there and you're just amazed at the supposed miracle so-and-so's done. Look at their teaching first. Ignore the miracle, look at their teaching. Because you already have the confirmed word right here. And if they teach something that's not found within the Word of God, then that miracle they performed, if it was a miracle, was not from God. It was fraudulent. Because God would not confirm a teaching that's violation of His Word. And to say that, well, God did that miracle to confirm what that guy said, then when it conflicts with this, throws this out the window. If we can no longer trust it because of modern day confirmations.
Yeah, it goes back to what Rosalito said, and he kind of goes back to verse 2 there. He says we need to be like verse 2 here in 2 Thessalonians 2, not be soon shaken in mind
Exactly.
or troubled.
That's exactly right. Yeah. A couple of the points here real quick before we go on to our second break there. He continues with verse 10, and he makes the point, after having said lying wonders, he says, with all unrighteous deception. Notice that, unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive a love of the truth that they might be saved. So instead of loving the truth and therefore receiving the truth, they chose to pervert the truth. They chose something else. And as a result, verses 11 and 12, God lets them do it. That is to say, God will send them a strong delusion. He will let them believe that lie. and therefore they will be condemned as a result of that. Now, some people wonder about, does God actually send the delusion? I think it's more like how he hardened Pharaoh's heart. In other words, he allows it to happen. In the case in point of Ahab, when Jehoshaphat was going to join Ahab in battle, Jehoshaphat wanted to consult a man of God, a prophet of God, and Micaiah was the only one there. And Ahab said, no, he always says bad things about me. So he says, no, don't let it be so. Let's bring him up here. So Micaiah comes up and he says to Ahab, go and be victorious. Ahab says, how many times have I told you, tell me the truth? He says, okay, here's what I saw in heaven. God brought the whole host of heaven together and said, who will go down there and deceive Ahab into thinking that he will win? And one of those hosts of heaven said, I'll do it. And so the point is that God allowed the prophets of Baal to lie to Ahab to tell him what he wanted to hear. And so same thing here. God's not going to cause that person to believe a delusion, but because they don't accept the truth, he lets them believe whatever they want to believe. All right, and this is why the danger of the fallen way is so important. So, any thoughts?
Well, Brian said in the chat room, my understanding is the miracles were done so that they would believe. Just because they believed didn't automatically make them obedient.
That's true.
You saw that a lot of times.
There were some Jewish leaders who believed Jesus, but because of their peers, they didn't follow him. John says these things are written so that you may believe, John 20. Yeah. Very good point. Well, let's go ahead and take our second break for the evening, and this one should be just a reminder of our Bible study in the morning, the Truth Factor discussion. We'll have more information there for you there. And on the other side of that, we're going to jump from 51 AD to about 53 to 56 AD for the next warning. So stay tuned. Our time travel jump will take place shortly. We'll be right back.
Greetings, I'm John Duvall.
I'm Paul Adams.
And I'm Tom Thornhill.
And I'm Daniel Duvall.
We are the host of the Truth Factor discussion. The Truth Factor discussion is a Bible study which takes place every Wednesday morning at 11 o'clock Central Time at live.truthfactor.com. We are currently studying through the book of James and would greatly appreciate your help. You can join the Bible study by going to live.truthfactor.com and participating with your comments and your questions. Come join us on Wednesdays at 11 o'clock Central Time at live.truthfactor.com.
Welcome back to our study. Dale, when we step forward to AD 53, 56 time frame here, we're looking at Paul's letter to the churches throughout Galatia. And in chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, he addresses the fact, and more is he amazed at how soon they are led away. And let's look at that for a minute.
Well, that's very true. He says, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you into in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ.
All right, so by 56 AD, potentially 30 years after the church was established, depending on when we date the establishment of the church. Now I'm going back to 26 AD instead of 31, okay? But, about 25, 30 years, Paul makes the note, he says, I marvel that these people were being turned away from the grace of Christ to a different gospel. And he makes the point, though, that it's not another gospel that's been delivered, but it's actually a perversion of the gospel of Christ that they taught. So within 25 years, we have individuals, the Judaizing teachers, already leading people away from the fold. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, and I think, if you look at this as well, these churches obviously didn't just have Christians who had been Christians since the beginning or since the establishment of the church in Galatia.
Mm-hmm.
They had new converts, they had newer Christians, and so he's talking to all of them in this case. And so, I mean, I agree with what you're saying there. It hadn't been much time, but even for others, it hadn't been even less time.
That's
Since
a
they
very
had
good point.
understood and believed.
That's a good point.
And David here, I think, in this kind of gets to, some of the heart of the matter in a lot of cases, anyway. It says a lot of the time people look for what is easiest.
Yeah.
And that's true of a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Again, they're not out to look for what is truth. They're out to look for what's the easiest version of the truth for me to accept.
Yeah. I think that's a very good observation there.
And Rosalita had pointed out Romans 16, verse 17, where it says, "Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses, contrary to the doctrine which you have learned, and avoid them." I mean, it's a good point to bring that up, because he's telling them, you're listening to these other gospels, and you're turning away. And if they had done what Romans 16 had taught, marked them and not had anything to do with them,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have that problem.
Especially when and we'll look at who was doing the teaching here, or the warning against it, I should say. But with what he talks about, Romans chapter 16, verse 17, that really directly applies when the false teacher is in amongst your midst. In other words, these Judaizing teachers were going throughout Galatia, and had they been doing what Paul told the church of Rome to do, they would have said, okay, you don't listen to this fella who's coming through to the churches to try to teach this error. And that's where really the elders step up to the plate. If there's someone in the congregation who's beginning to teach the brethren their locally false doctrine, they get up for the congregation and say, don't listen to Bob. He's teaching error. Yeah. It's a very, very good observation, Rosalito. Any thoughts, Dale?
Well, and what you said about Judaizing teachers, that's exactly what the Apostle Paul is talking about here. Because if you go to Acts the 15th chapter, verse 1 and also verse 24, he says, "For as much as we have heard that certain which went out from us have troubled you with words, subverting your souls, saying, ye must be circumcised and keep the law. Ye must be circumcised, or to whom we gave no such commandment." If you think about what's happening here and what happens today, is there's analogy. If you took a body of water that was perfectly still, and you tossed a little pebble out in that body of water, it starts out with just a little ring, but that ring keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is exactly how the gospel is perverted. You have someone that comes in with just a little change, not much, but just a little bit. And that little change leads to bigger and bigger changes. And so what you have now is you have a watered down religion. You have
Right.
people going their own way.
And one we'll talk a little bit later, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. They heap up to themselves teachers who will scratch their itching ears. Yeah, that's true. All right, John, anything else over there?
Yeah, I'm going to bring one in after they read the next one.
All right, let's go ahead and read 8 and 9
Okay.
there.
Galatians 1, verse 8, "But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed."
Okay. Paul acknowledges that what the apostles have taught is what people are to follow. And if someone brings something different, even if it's an apostle, or even if someone claims to be inspired by an angel from God, don't listen to them. The result is that person who's teaching error will be accursed.
I think we have an excellent comment in the chat room there that kind of really points out what may be happening here in a lot of cases. I mean, we see this in the Old Testament with the Jews many times.
Okay.
Joshua, for a perfect example. The people followed God under Joshua, and then one generation following, they followed. But then after that, they've neglected to continue to teach
Right.
the truth to their generations following, and they fell away, and they went into idol worship. And here, I think, is a perfect example of what may be happening. We saw here in the chat room comment by Joe, Acts 17, verse 11 and 12, where it says, "These were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness and searched the Scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so." And he says a person is easily led away when they stop searching for truth. And so they had heard, they had been preached the gospel, and they had heard it and they had received it, but did they study it every day?
Right.
Because if you hear it once and you believe it, but then you don't even look at it, or you don't even contemplate the truth for the next 6 months to a year, well, it's going to be easy for someone to come in and tell you almost what you heard before,
Right.
but a little different, and it sounds so similar you don't even recognize the difference. And kind of like what Dale said, it's that little ripple that someone threw in there, and you fall with that one, and then the next ripple is easy to believe
Right.
until you get these big ripples.
And if you ever want to know how to introduce error to a local church, that's the way you do it. It'll cost you your soul. but that's the way it's done, little bits at a time. And that's the way it's happening in the first century, of course, too. All right, any other thoughts or comments?
This word accursed that we read here in the New King James and also King James, the American Standard Translation uses the word that I think more aptly describes what Paul is saying here. The word is anathema,
Okay.
which means total annihilation. It means to put that individual away, get them out of your midst.
Okay. And so in that case, point, maybe not so much talking about let him be accursed as from the hand of God, but let him be removed from the midst
Exactly
of the
right.
of the people.
assembly.
That's
Yeah.
a very interesting point. Yeah. In other words, this ends up being kind of a direct set of instructions on what you do when you have someone in your midst there. Interesting point. Yeah. All right, John, any thoughts before we continue?
Oh, Brian mentioned Matthew 7:13, enter by the narrow gate, for broad is the way to destruction.
Okay.
So obviously, I think referencing the narrowness of the truth,
Okay.
the one truth that we have. Randall says false teaching always begin with this statement: "Hey, I got a great idea. I know I can't find it in the scriptures, but I feel like."
Yes.
So, I feel is always an important couple words that go in there.
Yeah.
I always forget, is it Greg?
It's Greg.
Okay,
Mhm.
Greg
Yeah,
in the
Greg
chat
Lynn.
room.
Mhm.
From College View there, Galatians 1:8 and 9, if properly applied, would eliminate effectively all of the division that exists in the religious world.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yep.
Going all the way back to the first century, if it had been abided by, then it would have dealt with it from that point forward.
Okay.
One interesting thought, and I say this more in tongue in cheek, but anytime someone says, I feel like, in reference to religion, the word feel, F-E-E-L, notice how closely those E's look like O's? And when we act upon feelings, we make ourselves foolish.
That
Okay.
sounds good. I like it.
All righty, go ahead. Next comment, I mean.
Josh Thornhill says, when people take someone at their word, they are easily taken into false doctrine.
Yeah,
I think that's a common thing for us. We want to believe people are going to tell us the truth.
exactly, especially if it's on the internet.
And so we neglect to test those things.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Benny says, Peter said that some things are hard to understand, and since we are warned of this, we should study to grow so that we are not led away. 2 Peter 3, verses 14 through 18.
Now, I think that's a very valid point. I have said before, you don't study to prove what you believe, you study to improve your belief. Okay. But part of our Bible study is to prepare us so that we can judge, like he says in 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, test or try the spirits. Prepares us so that we can weigh what we hear from the words of man and prepare us for that. That's a good point.
Goes back to that studying the scriptures daily. If you study a verse, a chapter, a passage, a concept that the Bible teaches once and you understand it, let's say for argument's sake, that's good.
Right.
But if you study it 5 times and you understand it the same way, and you study it a 10th time and you still have a firm grasp of you just become more grounded in that concept of truth.
Okay.
And so when you hear these false doctrines or these things that don't seem to sound just quite right,
Right.
it's easy for you to go back and go back to those passages and say, well, this is exactly why that teaching is not right. Because I know the Bible teaches this.
Well, think about all the error out there that's being taught on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And we're talking about we're talking about tweaking the teaching of the truth just a little bit, but it's still wrong. The whole AD 70 doctrine out there saying that the things that Christ had promised have already come to pass. Even all the way down to the work of the local church. So many things that in principle start out, you can make it sound good to someone that's not studied it. But the more they've studied it, then it's harder to sell that bill of sale. Yeah.
Craig said, Peter also said, untaught people will twist the scriptures. Tweak, you were using tweak there, so
Yeah,
goes
that's
with
right.
that a little bit.
That's right.
And Rosalita's pointed out Revelation 3, verse 9. That's my voice crackling, not the audio. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee.
Okay, yeah. Okay, anything else? We got a couple comments coming in there, but
Right, yeah.
tell you what, let's go ahead and take our next break, and on the other side of the break, got a couple more comments we'll bring in, and some of it's kind of duplicating what we've already said, but it's good to look at them again. And then after that, we're going to jump now to AD 58. Jump forward in time to AD 58 and Paul's conversation with the elders there from Ephesus. So stay tuned. We will be right back.
If you would like more information regarding the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, then visit our website at www.seminolepointe.org. Better yet, come see us. Our meeting place is located at 16300 North May Avenue, Edmond, Oklahoma. We meet Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Bible classes, 10:30 for worship services, and then Sunday afternoons at 5 o'clock for worship services. We also have Bible classes on Wednesday evenings at 7 o'clock. Thank you so much for your interest in the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ. We're looking forward to seeing you soon.
John, any thoughts from the chat room before we jump into AD 58 and Paul's discussion?
David kind of reminded us again of 1 John chapter 4, talking about test the spirits.
Okay.
Something we had looked
Yeah.
at earlier, and Randall mentioned that even the devil just inserted one word, that being not, when deceiving Eve. You will
Right.
not surely die.
Well, and comment on Craig's point about twisting. Peter makes the point in 2 Peter chapter 3, and commenting on Paul's writings, he says, they are somewhat hard to understand, which some have twisted as they do the rest of the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an actual Bible verse in 2 Peter 3 that uses that idea of twisting or perverting, as we talked about. Yeah. And and Chance has a comment there.
Yeah, I hadn't gotten down far enough. It stopped going down. In a recent Bible study, Chance says he had with a Catholic school teacher, he stated that there was more than one gospel, even to go as far as stating Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are evidence of unity and diversity, suggesting many truths.
Yeah. And years ago, I had a study with this young lady, and her conclusion at the end of our study is that there are more than one way of being saved. She saw that baptism was necessary, but she couldn't get away from belief alone. And so she said there was more than one way of being saved. So, all right, with that being said, Dale, let's, since you've sat here very quietly for a few minutes, let's jump to AD 58 in Acts chapter 20. What do we see there?
Well, we're talking about the elders and everything. Paul called the elders from Ephesus together, and this was towards the last time that they were going to see him. In fact, at the end of his admonishment of them, his conversation with them, they prayed and they broke down in tears because they knew this would probably be the last time they'd see him. But he had a very strong warning for them in Acts 20, verses 28 and 29. He says, "Therefore take heed to yourselves and to all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. For I know this, that after my departure savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock." This is a possibility that he's suggesting that some of the elders will be the savage wolves, but it could also be Christians among the congregation that would be savage wolves, and the elders had the responsibility to guard and protect the flock, to ensure that what is being taught is scriptural and sound.
Exactly. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking, we talked about earlier the first example that we looked at being an example of misrepresentation. And here to me, I see the fact that Satan is going to use open attacks on the church to try to pull people away into false doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Some cases he's going to go ahead and just be right on out about it and not really hide it very much. See who he can draw away that way. And so we're going to see a couple other ways in some of these other examples you have as well. It's deception, different things, and different techniques that Satan's going to use. But all of them, I think we can go right back to what we talked about earlier. All of them can be defeated with a diligent study of the Scriptures daily.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. But the sad thing is, especially, Dale, let's go ahead and read 30 and 31, is that even the ones that we look to shepherd the flock are not above making mistakes and being wrong.
Well, that's right. He goes on to say, also from among yourselves men will rise up, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after themselves. Therefore watch and remember that for 3 years I did not cease to warn everyone night and day with tears.
Yeah. And what is interesting about this particular warning, and we'll get into this in lesson number 3, but Ignatius, in one of his letters, as a matter of fact, let me grab this here for just a second. I'll give you a little preview of it because it's not ready for you to download yet. But Ignatius, in his letter to the church in Ephesus, this is about 110 AD, he says, hence it is fitting for you to set yourselves in harmony with the mind of the bishop, for your noble presbytery or eldership, worthy of God, is attuned to the bishop, even as the strings to a lyre. So if this is the same congregation about 50 years later to whom he's writing this letter, then we see the church at Ephesus having a singular ruling bishop and then an eldership under that bishop. And if that's the case, this might have been what Paul was talking about when he said, even from among yourselves some would rise up teaching perverse things. Almost 60, less than 60 years later, the church at Ephesus was going to have a ruling bishop, at least if the letters of Ignatius are halfway accurate, in representing what was of that time. So, all right. Any other thoughts or comments?
I thought it was interesting. He says, warning everyone night and day with tears.
Yeah.
Night and day. I mean, it's continual. He wasn't backing off of this principle that people were going to see this challenge.
Yeah. It's a very sad story if you think about it, because the Lord brought to the earth the salvation for man. It's kind of like a beautiful flower, okay, and it is perfect, and it is provided so that man could be saved, and all man has to do is to follow it, obey it, and teach it. But the devil's not going to let that happen. Mankind's not going to let that happen, and so they began to pervert it. So soon as it's been established, it begins to be perverted by man.
Yeah, Joe points over here to 2 Thessalonians 3, 6, and 7, where it says, but we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly and not according to the tradition which he received from us. He says, withdraw from every man. That teaches other than what God has given. This includes the elders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Elders, and we've talked about this before, while elders have oversight of the local congregation and they're shepherds of the local congregation, they are servants of the local congregation and servants of God, first and foremost. And they serve the congregation, they serve the Lord by overseeing the local congregation. That's why Paul told Timothy not to receive an accusation against an elder unless there be by 2 or 3 witnesses. But if there is, then you strongly rebuke such a one. Yeah. Okay.
Well, this is also why we have specific qualifications for elders. We also have specific qualifications for deacons. But the problem is sometimes the congregation, in their haste to have elders, will select men who are not qualified. And this is what causes some of the problems in the church, because generally it's these individuals who are not qualified that will become as savage wolves and try to take the flock in a different direction. Part of it's intellectual pride. The old adage, though, is we always think sin is bad, but in reality, sin is not bad. Sin is good. If it wasn't good, people wouldn't do it.
I think you're just jumping on semantics there from 3 or 4 different viewpoints.
Well, yeah, but think about it. I mean, that's Satan's greatest weapon.
I understand.
Sin is attractive, and people will always try to look for attractive things. We need to walk with blinders on and look straight ahead, walk the straight and narrow, and do as the Bereans did, search the Scriptures daily to ensure what is being taught is correct. And if we do that, then we should not stray.
There were a number of years ago, I moved to a congregation and didn't know the membership very well. And so there was one of the men in the congregation, what I didn't know, was not very faithful in his attendance. His wife wasn't. But me being the new guy there, they tended to be there more regularly. So his children were believing children. I thought, hey, we got him and brother so-and-so might make good eldership, you know. And so I made the mistake of kind of mentioning that to him and mentioning the business meeting, and the men said, well, we'll talk about everything. And I tell you what, the next Sunday he was there bright and early shaking everybody's hand. Sunday night there shaking everybody's hands, just, I mean, going above and beyond what he normally did. And then when the men made the decision, no, he's not qualified and everything, he went back to his regular old, maybe I'll be there, maybe I won't. And it's one of those cases where the Bible says if any man desires the office, it's okay for a man to desire to serve the church in this capacity. But he's got to be fully qualified. If not, the church is asking for trouble.
Well, and in that case, and I know of a congregation recently that's one of the biggest complaints about one of the men who was put in as an elder there, is that he wasn't hospitable until he was put up to be an elder, and then he became hospitable, and he knew everybody, and he made sure he shook everybody's hands. It's politicking. We have to be careful about things like that and make sure that that the people that we select are qualified. When we were attending a congregation in Ellisville, we didn't have elders there, and but we had myself and one other man that, for the most part, the congregation felt was qualified.
Okay.
But the other individual refused to accept the position because he had some children that was getting in their teen years and somewhat rebellious, and he felt like they didn't show enough respect towards him, and he said, if my children don't respect me, then I should not serve as an elder. And so they came to me and they said, well, you're the only one qualified to be an elder. And I said, no, I'm not qualified to be an elder if there's nobody else. And so we didn't have elders.
Because the Bible example is elders plural. That's
Exactly right.
That's exactly right.
But I respected
Yeah.
that individual, and by the way, that individual is an elder today.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. You know, Paul makes, I think it's the Timothy, he drives home the point that if a man does not rule well his house, how is he going to be able to rule the church? You know, if a man looks at his family and he views within his own mind that his kids are not in subjection to him as they should be, then he's right. He's going to have his hands full with that. He doesn't need to be worrying about the local church.
Well, that's true, and that's what I say. I
Yeah.
respected him for his decision. You know, the congregation was somewhat disappointed because they were looking forward to having elders.
Yeah.
But you don't want to put somebody in there that is not really qualified, nor feels that they're not qualified.
Yeah, yeah. Greg puts warning on there, and we're jumping ahead of Craig's comments here. We'll bring them in. He says, be afraid of those kind of men who want the office so badly that they openly campaign for it. I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's not a political office. It's an office of servitude, and your responsibility is to oversee the congregation and not lord it over the flock. So that's a very, very good word of warning there.
It's a
Greg.
privilege to serve as an elder, and to some extent it's an honor to serve as an elder. The fact that the congregation respects you enough that they have looked at the Scriptures to see if you meet the qualifications, it's an honor. But one should
I think
never.
Paul says it's worthy of a double honor.
Well, that's true.
I mean, you.
And one should never campaign for the office, because it does require a lot more work, a lot more effort, and quite honestly, to serve as an elder, that elder now becomes responsible for every soul in that congregation, and will answer on the judgment day if that elder does not do what they're supposed to do in shepherding the flock.
Which John brings up Brian's question there.
Right. Is it true elders will be judged to a special standard?
They will be judged by God if they don't fulfill their capacity. I don't know if I would so much say a special standard, but they will be held doubly, I'm not sure if that's the right term, let me see. In 1 Peter chapter 5, he says, I think this is the right passage. No, that's not the right passage. But yeah, the Bible does teach us that elders will be kind of a double, they will be held accountable if they don't fulfill their responsibilities that God has given to them by the Holy Spirit.
Well, and I would say this, it's not a special judgment. I think that every Christian is going to be judged according to how they implement or fulfill their abilities. If they have a talent to do something and they refuse to do it, I think they'll be judged for it. An elder will be judged for the qualifications for the position that he accepted. A deacon will be judged for the position that they have accepted. A Christian is going to be judged for the position that they have accepted, and that being a child of God, being faithful until death, period.
Greg threw up there the verse I had in mind there.
Yep, I thought you had it turned over there. Hebrews 13, verse 17, which says, "Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you." So that they do give account.
Yeah, and it's not so much a special, they're going to be judged for not fulfilling their responsibility that's been given to them by the Holy Spirit, through the Word.
You as a preacher will be judged for
Yeah.
what you teach in the pulpit.
That's a very good point. You know, I was going to say take a regular member. That's really not the right terminology. But take someone who doesn't stand in the pulpit and preach every Sunday. He's not going to be judged, in a manner of speaking, by the same standard I'll be judged by, because he's not preaching publicly and trying to help people know how to live and follow God. Now, if he lives hypocritically in his own life, he's going to be judged based on his own life and the way he has served or not served God. Same way for the elders there. I won't be judged for whether or not I properly oversaw the local congregation if I don't serve as an elder. But you will, for one who oversees the congregation. So in other words, as you said, we're all going to be judged based on what we do in our service to the Lord within the laborings of the kingdom. We're almost out of time. Actually, we are out of time. But Craig kind of jumps ahead of us a little bit and reminds us, and we'll look at this in Lesson 3, that good old Pope Boniface II, I think it is, declared himself the first universal pope in 606 A.D. And he says the road to that had to start somewhere, and it did. And we'll talk about that. It's very, very interesting to look at that progression there that led to that. So it's not hard to believe there being only one elder in some churches that early, and that's exactly right. They would call them bishop later, but yeah. Okay. Any thoughts or comments?
I have no thoughts, other than the fact that I appreciate the comments from the chat room, as always. We had good participation tonight, and I appreciate that. I think it's a good study, and we just have to keep in mind that each and every day of our lives, we are going to answer for the things we say and the things we do.
That's right. And the study is designed to answer the question, why are there divisions among churches? What we're looking at tells us why warns us they would develop, and they did. And it also tells us that they do continue to develop today. John, any thoughts?
No, appreciate the opportunity to study with you guys tonight. Enjoy the chat room discussion as well. Had a lot of good discussion there.
Same here, yeah. Appreciate you joining us for this study this evening. We'd love to have you back here again next Tuesday night. If you're available tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock Central Standard Time at live.truthfactor.com, you can join us as we study through the book of James, being in James chapter 3. And I'll put a plug in for the virtual Bible study on Thursday night at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time at thevirtualbiblestudy.com. Visit that, and they have a chat room like ours. Actually, we developed ours from looking at theirs and using the chat roll service, which was a very good idea they had. And you can follow along in their study and jump into the chat room with your comments and questions there. Thank you so much for joining us for our study this evening. And Lord willing, we will see you back here again next Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. at live.scripturalway.org. Have a wonderful week.